All video games need easy modes!
Hello everyone, Ace here, and today let's talk about video game difficulty, and more specifically, why not all video games need easy modes. A topic that I believe that most fellow gamers will already understand, but one that unfortunately in this day and age still needs to be addressed apparently. But first of all, let's summarize the reasoning behind the people that are demanding that every single video game in the industry have an easy mode. And the reasoning and justification for this is that these people simply feel entitled to finishing any and all games that they own, for the specific purpose of enjoying the plot. Of course, often these kinds of individuals will try to compare video games to other art forms, such as, say, books or movies, in order to justify this reasoning. So to begin poking holes into that particular train of thought, let's start off by talking about that particular comparison to books and movies, which, to be frank, is not a very good comparison at all, specifically because, unlike books or movies, video games are an interactive art form. And given the nature of it being an interactive art form, video games are in fact closer to other interactive art forms such as martial arts than they are to movies. So in this respect, one could argue that demanding all video games need easy modes is at least somewhat comparable to arguing that all karate dojos make it easier to receive a black belt without the years of training, simply because these newcomers feel entitled to it. I'm sure you can all see the fundamental problem there, that being that the lack of work actively diminishes the value of the black belt, and even to some degrees defeats the whole purpose of participating in that particular interactive art form. In fact, amusingly enough, you can even show the holes in this line of reasoning by applying it to uninteractive art forms as well, despite the people pushing this notion actively comparing video games to these aforementioned uninteractive art forms. For example, imagine arguing that every single piece of Shakespearean writing needs to be dumbed down, specifically so that these grown adults with underdeveloped reading skills can comprehend those works, because they were too lazy to put the effort in on their own. Of course, any sane, rational individual would realize that doing so would defeat the whole purpose of Shakespearean writing and greatly diminish the quality of those works, defeating the point of reading them in the first place. Or alternatively, let's look at movies, which in their own way still at least require some attention span, with a fair amount of meaning hidden within the little details, that could be interpreted in multiple different ways. In other words, the sort of film that encourages multiple viewing. Now imagine that these people demand that every single detail in a film be explained to the audience in exacting degrees, with no room for interpretation because that would require at least some critical thinking on the part of the audience. Once again, the entire point would be utterly ruined, and all in the name of making these particular art forms more accessible. So in other words, if we applied this train of thought to other art forms, it would be at the direct hindrance of those aforementioned art forms. And you may now be wondering why I decided to start off by talking about the negative impacts that this line of reasoning would have with other art forms. And the answer is very simple, because the people that need to hear this are not gamers. And not only that, but they also clearly lack the patience necessary to have this information relayed to them in a way that they will understand later on. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the negative impacts that demanding all video games need easy modes will have on the industry itself, were video games as an entire industry to bend the knee to these people. For a start, some video games are deliberately built from the ground up to be difficult in the first place, and that is part of the whole point to these particular titles. Some of the games that you might recognize in this particular camp include titles such as the Ninja Gaiden series and the vast majority of the stealth RTS subgenre, as best exemplified by the Commando series. In both of the examples that I have provided, a high difficulty is part of the whole point, specifically because the various tasks that the player is expected to perform are themselves meant to be extremely difficult, and thus the high difficulty actively emphasizes the notion that the player character is the only one capable of accomplishing those particular objectives. It's almost as if the high difficulty actively goes hand in hand with the plot of those particular games. Even if you ignore plot, there are other types of games that simply by their design are difficult in their own ways, and dumbing them down to appeal to a wider audience of people that just aren't going to be playing them anyways is completely counterproductive. For example, tactical shooters by their very nature actively require a very punishing damage model, meaning that the player can in those games go down in just 1 or 2 hits during the entire mission. Trying to make a more forgiving damage model for the player by itself completely defeats the whole point of that entire subgenre. In other words, demanding that every single video game have an easy mode to appeal to as wide an audience as possible would actively require the abandonment of multiple subgenres of games, as they simply could not be effectively made in order to cater to these particular types of demands. And of course, what of multiplayer-only games? I ask because this line of reasoning would actively encourage that underperforming players start receiving special handicaps and hacks in order to compete with more skillful players. And to be honest, this isn't even a slippery slope, because hackers that come forward and explain why they hack have a habit of utilizing the exact same excuses as the crowd that demands that all video games need easy modes. Which, to be brutally honest, does make one wonder just how much of an overlap there is between those two particular communities. I could continue to keep going on about the problems that the particular notion that all video games need an easy mode would have on the industry, but I believe by now that most would already well and truly get the point. Of course, this isn't to say that easy modes are in and of themselves fundamentally a bad thing, but trying to force them into every single video game that comes out is undeniably a bad idea. And a bad idea that most gamers can absolutely recognize for the reasons that I have already provided. And also something that I now hope that at least some non-gamers can also recognize as a bad idea. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.